Haswest, Pesia. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of Celia Avila at the Missoula Public Library and me, we welcome you to the second session of IndigiPalooza MT 2025. My name is Anna East, and I'm the Executive Director of Chickadee Community Services. We're serving as the fiscal agent for this event, and I have the great pleasure of seeing every single donation that comes in. And we have had hundreds of people, over 500 people, have donated to Chickadee and to IndigiPalooza to really bring this to life for everyone in the community and all the people who came from far and wide. And I get to see donations from a $3 donation, which we had several of, all the way up to thousands of dollars from individuals and organizations. So thank you so much for all of that generosity and for being here. I want to acknowledge our tobacco level funders at $5,000 and above. We have Sandra Rowe, the Henry Family Foundation, the Missoula Public Library Foundation, the Montana Historical Society, and the Potlatch Fund. So thank you to all of you and everyone else who made this happen. And now I'm going to hand it over to our moderator for this session, our Montana Poet Laureate, Chris Latre.
Bonjour, bon matin, Indigenous Doug. Good morning. Hello, all of my relatives. Nice to see everybody back here. How many were here last night for these wonderful poets? I've been talking a lot about like the intertribal nature of this, but like yesterday morning, or no, I guess it was, what day is it? Saturday to Friday? So Thursday evening, I get a text from Joy Harjo, and she's like, hey, does anybody want to have breakfast or lunch tomorrow? This would have been yesterday. And first I'm like, Joy Harjo just sent me a text. And then so we did this thing yesterday where a bunch of us just went out informally, unplanned. We went to lunch. So it was us and a couple of the Chickadee board members and Anna and Celia and Celia and at the end of the table. It was just joyous to see, you know, because Denise and Sasha had never met Joy before. So, you know, we were just kind of on the fringe of these new relationships being created, which is kind of the whole point of something like this. You know, the panels and the performances and all of that stuff is great. But it's just the ability, the opportunity for us to come together in ways that it can kind of be difficult to make time for. And I was thinking of this just now because in the back of the room, I saw my relative talking to my Crow brother, Shane Doyle. They went to school together, and I've heard both of them talk about each other, but I've never seen them in the same room together. And here I am seeing them talking in the back of the room, and I just felt so happy that those kinds of things we get to participate in as an intertribal community. And I hope all of you feel the same way about being able to say, hey, one time I was in the same room with Denise Lajimodiere and Sasha LaPointe, and I'm just gurgling with pleasure right now. So this I also want to hand, my friend Charles Martin is sitting right there too, and I have known Charles when I moved back to Montana 20 years ago or whatever. Charles was a newcomer here, and we became friends. So you're like one of my oldest Missoula friends, even though you're from Arkansas. So thank everybody for coming, miigwech. This panel is pretty near and dear to me because, as Anna mentioned, I've been the Montana Poet Laureate for the last 2 years. My term is slowly swirling down the drain. It should be announced anytime in the next week or two as to who the next Poet Laureate is going to be. And it's been such an opportunity, and I'm so grateful that it happened. And I never would have guessed that it was ever going to happen in my life. To be able to travel around and do all these things just because I'm a poet. Joy Harjo told me this morning as we were talking, when I took her to the airport because she's flying back, and she talked about how, you know, she's trying to travel less, but traveling is how, you know, doing these events and traveling for them is how she makes her living. She said, because even the books of poetry, even as U.S. Poet Laureate, I can't make a living selling books of poetry. So poetry remains like the most punk rock form of art outside of actual punk rock, I think. Because you have to really be committed to what it is about poetry that draws you into that. You know, nobody's writing poems thinking, okay, if I nail the last stanza, they're going to make a movie out of it. In the way that novelists can kind of, and you see a lot of that, where you read a book where it kind of feels like, we don't have any novelists in the room, do we? Where you can feel like people are writing for the big movie deal, and I don't begrudge anybody that. In fact, people have asked me about Becoming Little Shell being made a movie, and I said, as long as Tatanka Means is given the role of me, they can do whatever they want with the movie. So poetry, and both of you write things outside of poetry, but I'm going to guess that identifying as a poet is kind of your core. Am I correct in that? Sasha, you're nodding vigorously. Why is that? And feel free to, I'm not big on introductions, so feel free to introduce yourself at the first opportunity.
Butlachi bid tabushadjash taqwšeblu seedsta twal Nooksack gwal Skagit. Hello, I'm Sasha LaPointe. I'm from Nooksack and Upper Skagit. Tigwitseed, Chris, for having us out. And I was nodding vigorously because Denise actually had this moment. We were at the book signing table last night, and it was so cool. I wasn't eavesdropping, but you were having a conversation right next to me, and I just heard about like all of the many things that you do, but you said, I'm a poet first. And I was like, that's baller. Like, and I agree with that. Like, I write nonfiction. I also am a teacher, but like poet is just, like you were saying, at the core of my identity, I think. So that's the nod.
Oh, hi, Bonjour, Anine, Mikanakwajuan and Dunjiba. I'm from Turtle Mountain in North Dakota. Wabishka B'nai Sawana Dijinakaz. My spirit name, or my tribal name, Ojibwe name, is White Thundercloud Woman. And I am of the Crane clan. Can't remember how to say that right. Ajijak, Nindunjiba. I am North Dakota Poet Laureate. I was for 2 years, and then the state legislature decided to do another 3 years, so we decided to make Poet Laureates for North Dakota 5 years now. So that'll give me more of a chance to do more of what I want to do, which is super. I want to work more with Native students on the reservations throughout North Dakota to hopefully get more Poet Laureates, because the Poet Laureates that right now are in line for when I'm done, they're all like 80 years old and older, which is nothing wrong with that. Was like, come on, we need some young people to take over. So it's so fun to see such a huge crowd like this. I do some poetry readings throughout the state, of course, in libraries, and if there's 5 people that show up, it's like, yes, wow, man, this is fabulous. Thank you for showing up. So this is so wonderful. Thank you for showing up for us poets. We deeply appreciate it.
How do they pick the Poet Laureate in North Dakota? I'm just curious.
Oh, man, for me, the Poet Laureate before me, Dr. Larry Y. Woody, he's my mentor. He was in perpetuity. So, like 30 years, he was Poet Laureate. Oh, wow. And so when I got up, we had to go through the state legislature, and I said, I ain't doing this for 30 years. I'll be over 100 years old, so I ain't doing this. So we had, but I had to go through the state legislature, the whereas, and then through the Senate, and then cross over through the House, and it was nerve-wracking. But the state senator that helped walk me through it, he said that he's never seen where it was unanimous, all the Republicans, Democrats for both the House and in the Senate to vote for me. So that was really wonderful. But it was pretty nerve-wracking. It took from like January until April before they let me know. So that we changed that process now. We'll have a committee, and then we'll select the next Poet Laureate.
So the way we do it in Montana is, and the Arts Council, Montana Arts Council is who kind of runs the program. And every 2 years, they put out a call for nominations. So any one of you could nominate any one of each other or yourself to be Poet Laureate, and all those go on a list, and then the Arts Council narrows those lists of nominees down to like 3 or 4 people that ultimately goes to the governor's office, and he makes the determination as to who's going to be the Poet Laureate, and then 2 years later it happens again. And I used to make jokes about our governor. as it relates to poetry and just reading in general, but I got a really nice card in the mail from him about how much he enjoyed becoming Little Shell. So I'm kind of tapping the brakes. If it was a smaller group, maybe, you know, like what we might have talked about at lunch yesterday would be a little different. But so every state, and there's not, do you interact at all, or have you, with other state poets laureates? People think we're like this cabal, and we meet in like a dark room in robes and plan poetry for the country, and it just, at least I haven't been invited.
No, I haven't. But right now, what's really cool is that you're Turtle Mountain Little Shell. I'm Turtle Mountain Little Shell, and Hyde Erdrich was a poet laureate for Minneapolis. She's Turtle Mountain, and then right now, just recently, is Mark Turcott. And where's Mark? What state?
It's either Minnesota or Wisconsin, isn't he?
No, I think Connecticut or somewhere out there. He's working in a professor. So right now there's four Turtle Mountain poet laureates. So I said, something must be in the water, hey?
It's called Anishinaabe domination. So Sasha, I want you to expand a little bit more, because I guess you wrote one book, essay collection, Red Paint, for sale, just down the hall, before your book of poetry came out. Was the poetry already kind of in, what's your story? You went to IAIA, and did you get your MFA in poetry, or?
Okay, so this is classic Gemini coded.
Okay.
When I was applying for my MFA, I couldn't decide which genre, so I applied to both. My advisor was like, just apply to both, see which one. And I was accepted into both poetry and nonfiction. And so I was like, I still can't decide. And he said, do a double MFA then. So very Gemini coded. I did 2 years in nonfiction and added a third year where I got to work with the incredible Joan Nevaeh Kane. If you are not familiar with her work, she was my mentor. She's incredible. I'm actually rereading her book, Hyperboreal, right now. She's one of my favorite poets, and I'm not just saying that because she was my mentor. She's a genius. So yeah, I couldn't decide between the two, so I realized I didn't have to. And circling back to the question, in writing the memoir, Red Paint, I was at the same time writing the poems that became Rose Quartz. So they were sort of happening in tandem. And my agent said, never say that in public, but I'm gonna say this in public again, that I think that the Rose Quartz and Red Paint are the same story. They're just told in different languages to me. And sometimes for my nonfiction writers out there, when we're mucking around in some of our hardest memories and experiences, you need to take little breaks. At least I did. And for me, I would shift, not that poetry is by any means easy, it's often harder, but for my heart and my spirit, I would put the prose down and switch modes, switch lanes, and go into writing the poems that became Rose Quartz. So I'm always saying, they're the same story. And my agent's like, please don't say that. But they are, and I think that's really beautiful. So if that answers your question, I was writing them at the same time. Mm-hmm. And Rose Quartz came out after the memoir, but they were happening at the same time. And I feel like if you read both books closely, you will see that.
Mm-hmm. So they're two different art forms, and like you're implying your agent almost, and other people will suggest, don't do multiple things at the same time. But Denise, you do multiple art forms. When you're writing poetry, you're not just writing poetry, and you're not birch bark biting or any of the other things that you do. Can you talk a little bit how you energetically it works shifting back and forth, or do you pay attention to that, or is it like a conscious thing you do that that you can't just put all of your energy into one thing?
Well, I worked as a professor, so it was published at Parish, so I had to do a lot of academic writing, which was not a whole lot of fun. But then I started researching boarding schools, American Indian boarding schools. Both my parents and all of my grandparents were boarding schooled. So I decided to do a qualitative interview study, and I went around Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, and interviewed those who wanted to be interviewed, Native American elders that had gone to boarding schools. And the qualitative interview study, then it became my book, Stringing Rosaries. And before that, I had done, for my dissertation, I did a qualitative interview study for my dissertation, and it was called Native Females and Their Path to Leadership. So I interviewed Native females that were, like, say, the first time ever chief or chairwoman of their tribe. That was my definition of Little Shell, the first time that a Native woman was heading up a community college and so on. So, and I wanted to turn that also into a book, and that's been like since 2006, so I probably won't do that. But I realized, I think, for listening to Joy and stuff, that I said, why am I doing qualitative interview studies and not doing the mathematical part of, like, finding the null void and so on? Because I didn't do any of my research with the mathematical side. And someone said, well, you're a storyteller. And that just really hit me like, oh, wow, yeah. And that goes back, how many generations for Native people. So yeah, so I like, and that relates, of course, to poetry. I started writing poetry when I was 10 years old, and I never went through a master's or fine arts. I just had to write. When I was in high school, I took some creative writing classes and some poetry classes, and I remember Mrs. Avshalomov, she took me aside. This is 1968, when I was in high school in Portland, Oregon, and at the end of the class, she said, Denise, you can write. And I looked at her and I thought, oh, poor Mrs. Avshalomov, she doesn't know that Indians don't write. Because I had no mentors in 1968 who were Native American that were published. So, and then who would know anyway in Portland, Oregon. So I still couldn't stop writing. It's like when you're a poet or whatever, you can't not write. So on little scraps of paper and big chief notebooks and everything, I was still writing poetry. And it wasn't until 1980, and I'm not sure of the year, but I know Louise Erdrich's book came out in 1984. But I held her book at some point and thought, oh my God, here's a writer, she's Native, she's female, and she's from my tribe. I got to start writing again. So she did a workshop, and her and Hai did a workshop in Belcourt, and she took my writing and went off and spent the night with my writings that I had been just writing, and took me underneath a bur oak tree by the lake and on the reservation there, and she turned to me and she said, Denise, you can write. And this time I believed her. And those poems became my first book, Dragonfly Dance. As you can see, I like dragonflies. Yeah, very, very spiritual creatures. So that became my path to being a poet. So, and I have two full-length books and then two chapbooks. And if some of you that are older, I had something in my brain, like a vision. If you remember the old cards that, the Rolodex cards that you spin and pull out a card and stuff. So those 4 books represent that Rolodex of cards. I would just pull out a card and start writing a poem because they just been building up for decades. So someone right now said, what are you writing right now? Well, I'm waiting for that Rolodex to fill back up a little bit. Or someone said waiting for the well to fill, but I am working on my next full-length book of poems right now, Miigwech.
Yeah. Well, I love how you stated how, like when you were in high school, you didn't have anybody that you could read because there was no representation of Native women anywhere, let alone in an experience living like yours was. And it wasn't until Louise kind of broke that ground and told you that you can write. And, Sasha, I want to kind of take that to you because now you're a person, you're slightly younger than Denise and I. And when you think about your book and your poetry and this wonderful Thunder Song, and I'm going to ask you about that essay that we talked about yesterday, but do you think about that? Do you think about young Native girls and women seeing you out there doing this work and what that means kind of generationally, as we were talking about in the first panel this morning, which you weren't there for, so you don't have any idea what I'm talking about.
But I'm like low-key going to get emotional because I love this question.
Yeah.
Thank you. When writing Red Paint, I can't remember what, it came up in a meeting, someone was like, who's your audience? And it's also weird as artists, as writers, poets, to think about your work and commodify it. So I didn't love that question at first. I was like, what do you mean? And it was like a group of marketing people. But anyway, like grateful for them. Not trying, no shade, no shade. But I remember having to think about that for a second and being like, ew, what? Like, who's my audience? But immediately in my heart, I thought of being 14 on the Swinomish Reservation and desperately needing a book like that and needing to see myself represented. And so I thought of like immediately I was like, my audience is like young Native people that need to see and relate, see themselves in a story. And your story was so beautiful with the Louise, and like, oh, feels. But like, I think about that often, like whenever I come to the page, like hoping that like some of those stories can relate and help or inspire someone. That's why I do it. And I remember answering that in a way more eloquent way, I hope, in that meeting. But they were just like, oh, okay. And I was like, that's my audience.
Yeah.
Like, I'm writing it for, like, I mean, 14-year-old Sasha needed that book really bad. And so I think of young people, whether you're on a reservation or urban, but like have a lack of representation or ability to connect to larger stories. And like, so, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, we keep coming back to stories, which is the whole purpose of this edition of IndigiPalooza, is the idea that storytelling exists in multiple ways. Like, it's easy for us to think storytelling is just a book or whatever, but it can be poetry. And when I identify, you know, I'm happy to be introduced as a poet or whatever, but if I introduce myself, I'm a storyteller. You know, sometimes it's poetry, sometimes it's a work of nonfiction, sometimes it's a magazine article, sometimes it's just walking out in front of a room full of people and just hoping I think of something to say from the time I begin the walk till I arrive at the microphone. And I love that that's just what's automatically coming out of your mouths as you're speaking about what you do, is the storytelling aspect of it. Which kind of leads me to a question which, you know, often people want to kind of mythologize in a way who we are as storytellers as Native people. And like the oral tradition is part of that. And if we want to, we could say every single person in this room comes from an oral tradition at some point. And but someone asked me recently at a reading, talk, whatever, you know, how does your poetry reflect your ancestral ties to that oral tradition, to that storytelling tradition that existed before we started writing things, like our languages that were never meant to be written down, never intended to be written down. How does that live in you? Or do you ever think about that?
I was after my introduction by Chris last night. I was worried about what he's going to ask today. So,
well, just, you know, I wasn't going to bring this up.
I don't know how to answer that.
But last night, you know, I told a story about her saying the unkind words about Father Belcourt,
Which I deny.
which she denies. And if you saw her come on the stage with this very warm hug, she's like, "I never said that, you shit ass." So thank you for giving me the opportunity to defend myself.
What was the question? Storytelling.
Yeah, do you think of that, you know, as that connection back to the... Sorry, dude.
Just hanging out in this moment a little bit, so it's really great. Did you actually whisper that to him?
Yeah, I did. That I will admit to, I did.
It's amazing. I do, and I think it's complicated for me. I think I tried to tackle it in one of the essays in Thunder Song, where my partner was literally asking for one of my grandma's stories, and he was asking again and again, and I kept saying no. Like, that's not my, like, I don't identify as a storyteller. And I think it took me till the end of the essay, and then I finally recite one of her stories. But that's part of it. It's complicated because I think she was a traditional storyteller and a very celebrated one. It was her gift. And I feel like I'm never trying to do that. Like, there's a difference between I mean, she always knew I was going to be a writer, and she would call me a storyteller in my own way. And so I think coming from that has been a gift, right? Like being inspired by our tribe stories, growing up, seeing that, being immersed in like the language and the stories, like that is such a privilege and a gift, and I feel really lucky. But it's also like I'm never going to be a traditional storyteller. That's not my jam, right? I have mad respect for it, but like I think a contemporary storyteller in my own way is like what she sort of guided me towards. But it's always there. It's always in the back of my mind. I don't think I'd be a writer had it not been for her influence. Does that even answer the question?
Well, it does, but I kind of want to challenge you a little bit on that. Not challenge, but just like respond. Like number one, do you feel like it's your choice as to, and when we say traditional, 100 years from now, what will they call what your storytelling was? So where's the line is for what's traditional and what isn't? Because I feel like you're selling yourself short a little bit.
I think that, I'm not out here telling mink and whale, and I am telling like Basket Woman in my own way in an essay. Like I'm examining these stories, but I'm not going to come orate like mink and whale or the Coyote and Rock story. Like, I guess that's the differentiation.
Sure.
Yeah. But I have leaned into an owned contemporary storyteller. Like, I'm not going to do what our grandma did, but I'm doing something different, but it's part of it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Denise, have you properly recovered to answer the question?
I'll talk to you later.
She's going to meet you in the alley.
My poetry, when I first came out with my book, Dragonfly Dance, I was doing a reading at the Birchbark bookstore in Minneapolis. Louise Erdrichs has a bookstore there, and there was a room next door. It's now a restaurant. But after reading some of the poems, there was a young man that came up and said, aren't you embarrassed with some of your poems, putting all your trauma out there? And I said, no. What I found is that my poetry was very healing. It was my therapy. So my poems aren't like old-time storytelling or, wolves howling in the distance and so on. They're more about the trauma that I went through growing up. I said my parents were boarding school. Papa was sent to Chimawa, and then he was in the CCC camps, and then in World War II up in the Aleutians. And same with, and Mama went through boarding school. So where did my parents learn to be parents? Or, we were never hugged, or we were never told I love you, because they never were in boarding school. So it wasn't until I started doing my research as a professor that I started understanding my parents and why they parented us the way they did. They disciplined us the way they were disciplined at boarding school, which was, with the belt, and we had to kneel in the corner, not on a broomstick, but we had to kneel in the corner like Mama did. So my first book of poems, if you read them, they're rough. Some of them are rough. They're tough. Some are autobiographical and some aren't. One poet became a mentor. Told me sometimes you need to lie to tell the truth. So sometimes not. Sometimes my cousins go, well, that never happened. I go, I know, it's just a poem, So I get called on that. But all of my poems have been very, very healing. It's like they're in the paper, they're in the book, and I can close it, and they're off of me, and then onto you guys. So be careful when you read them. Right now, and so then I have my book. I have a children's book also. When you talk about different things I did besides academic writing and poetry, I did a children's book, and Angie Erdrich, Louise's sister Angie, she did the artwork to this. This is out of the Minnesota Historical Society. And it's just about a little powwow girl. It's loosely based on my daughter. So this happened, one of the lines that here happened when she was 4 or 5 years old. She's now 52, so it took me a few years to get to writing this little book. I have another one that is with Lee and Lowell right now in Manhattan, and it's about Wawate. How many of you, do you see Northern Lights here in?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in the Turtle Mountains, we see, you can't whistle at them. They come down and choke you. So have a lovely little book that Lee and Lowell was looking at publishing. And right now, what's taking up all of my time, and I was talking to to the gals, and last night I had a book proposal accepted by Scholastic, and I signed a contract with them for, I'm calling it Tree Popping Moon right now. Me and the editor are going back and forth. She doesn't like the title, and I and my agent love the title, but it's loosely based on my father's boarding school experience when he was sent to Chimawa. So it's based in 1925, and the little boy's name is Joseph, which is my father's middle name, and there's his best friend is Sonny. It's a rough story. It is, the horrible things that happened to my father at boarding school when he was nearly beaten to death in something called the Gauntlet. So, and then there's some humor in there. It's like someone said my poems, I throw some humor in my poems. Well, there's also some humor in this book. But it started out as a 700-word picture book, and I was sending it off, and the editors and so on were saying, no, this needs to be a middle grade novel. I said, no, I'm a poet. I can write 10-word poem. I can't write a middle grade novel, no. And I kept sending it out, and it got up to 30,000 words, 10,000. They said, nope, we're not going to accept it. And I sent 30,000. I sent it out, and they go, nope, it needs to be 50,000 words for a middle grade novel. Oh my God, I'm a poet. I can't do this. It is now 54,000 words. Yeah. It's not done. It's in its fourth round of edits, but it should be done pretty soon with the edits, with working with a wonderful, wonderful editor. So that's something new. I will never write a middle grade novel again. No, never. This is it. I'm going back to my poetry, but I'm having trouble. It's sucking up all my brain power, it seems like, so I'm having trouble with my poems. I think you mentioned you have like a file with poems that are ready, and they're calling to me, we're lonesome, we miss you. So as soon as I can get this off my plate, then I'm going to go back full time to writing, filling up that Rolodex in my brain.
Yeah.
I just want to add, I just want to pause for one moment to revel in the fact that I was just referred to as the gals with Joy Harjo. And I just I'm like,
I was there too.
I'm like,
Am I a
goals.
gal?
But also speaking to that, we were talking about this with Joy yesterday, and the pile of poetry that you need to return to, I was like, oh, I call it my wood pile. Like growing up in Swinomish, one of my chores, we did a lot of chorin, was stacking, chopping wood and filling up the woodshed. So now I call my pile of poems that I need to come back and hang out with my wood pile, so I can pull from it. And then Joy was like, I call mine the bone pile. And I was like, you are so cool. What? Bone pile, wood pile. But also, I love to hear it. More poets need to write novels, because when a poet writes a novel, it turns out it's so beautiful. So
Yeah.
I'm glad you're doing that.
Yeah. Well, even bringing up the children's book, when I got here this morning, in Fact and Fiction was setting up the table, talk about representation, just how many, there's probably 20 different children's picture books that Barbara Thoreau, who founded Fact and Fiction back in '86, is here. You never saw that many Native-focused children's books. So that is a sign of that evolution of, ground being broken by Native writers, and how that then becomes available as representation to a wider variety of people of all different Native communities and cultures. So I think that's great.
Yeah, there's a huge call out right now for Native writers to write children's books. There's an imprint called Heart Drum. I think it's an imprint of HarperCollins, and they're publishing a lot of Native writers' children's books. So the other thing that I was told too is my children's book that's with Lee and Low. I had it with a kukum, with a grandma, taking the little girl out to view the Northern Lights, and they said, oh, we have a lot of Indian Native grandma books, So I had to turn them into mushum, into grandpa. So keep that in mind too. So and a lot of my poems are with my grandmother, with kukums. Come to think of it, Grandpa really wasn't around, come to think of it. But anyway, so keep in mind, if for Native writers, start writing books about your grandfathers.
So those are Cree words.
Yeah, those are Cree.
For
yeah.
Grandma and Grandpa, what are they?
Mushum and kukum.
Do you guys know how you cook potatoes at Grandma and Grandpa's house when you're in a Cree community? First you mush them, then you cook them.
Oh, for sick.
I love a good dad joke.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So from a craft perspective now you have to sit up straight because we're gonna talk craft. This was another, I was kind of eavesdropping on the gals talking last night backstage in the green room, talking about forms. So forms of poetry. So all three of us primarily live in free verse. Wouldn't we agree with that? And I don't know form. I know free verse and I know haiku, and that's pretty much it. And I don't care to know anymore. And I felt really guilty because you all were discussing the need to maybe constrain yourself in form sometimes to challenge yourself as a poet and your ability to write. And that's also what I do like about haiku is the constraints. You know, they're short and supposed to have there's rules about how many syllables in each line, but they're kind of, you know, it's not apples to apples when you're translating a Japanese tradition to an English one. But I was really fascinated and not going to say a word about not knowing any of the things that you guys were talking about. So, Sasha, I think you brought it up last night. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Do we have any poets in the room? Okay. You don't have to be shy in this place.
So I'm going to keep it a buck. Like, I am a form anarchist. Like, I prided myself on being like, I don't do form. I don't like rules forever. And that's just, I exist in free verse. People call my poetry narrative, whatever. Like, it is what it is. I like to just go nuts on the page. But this past year, a friend challenged me to be like, you know, especially when I was stuck. I was feeling stuck. And they were like, have you ever like messed around with form? And I was like, no, I hate form. I was like, that was my stance, right? That was like how I identified. And then they were like, but why? Try it, and like pushed me. And so the first form I learned or attempted was the Sapphic form. And when having those kinds of rules and constraints on the page, like things came out that I wouldn't have maybe arrived at. And so then all of a sudden I was like, do I like form? Like, I'm having an identity crisis. But I still, free verse in my heart, like little punk poetry heart, but I would encourage folks to mess around with form. And yeah, that's it.
So you had the opinion about not liking form before you ever tried it.
Right, and then in like sort of, you know, bashing my head against the gates of form, being like, I can't do this, kind of taught me and like got me out of what I would normally come to the page and just kind of spew out whatever, like do the thing that I always do. And instead I had to like, I struggled through it, but what came out was something I wouldn't have arrived at before. And so I appreciated it. My friend was so proud of themselves too. They were like, oh, you like form. And I was like, I like the Sapphic form. So yeah.
So we had a word for that when I worked at Fact and Fiction, and that's called egg planting. Because one time Mara, who now owns Fact and Fiction, asked me, oh, do you like eggplant? I said, oh, God, no. And she looked at me and said, have you ever tried it? No. So that became kind of our thing where anything that I just was like adamantly opposed to was egg planting because odds are I'd never tried it before. TV shows, never watched it. I hate it. Titanic, I will die if I have to see Titanic because I hate it and I've never seen it. Denise?
Yeah. I told a story about when my freshman year at Portland State University, I was a hippie, I was living in a commune, and I took a creative writing class, and the professor came in, and he had long hair, and he was barefoot, and just in ragged jeans, and he goes, y'all have an A now, let's just start writing, you know, we're not going to do this this tenure thing, I don't believe in any of that. And we don't do form. So I go, all right. So, and my journals and everything, so I just did free verse. So fast forward 50 years to North Dakota, University of North Dakota, when I was working on my dissertation. I thought, I'm going to go over to the English department and ask if I can sit in on some of their poetry workshops. And Dr. Larry Woody, who was the poet laureate of North Dakota forever, he was the professor. So I walk in and introduce myself, and I said, and I just do free verse. And he looked at me and he said, in order to break the rules, you need to know the rules. That was the best thing, one of the best things I was ever told. And so he had us do, you know, villanelles, sestinas, which I fell in love with, haiku, and I can never remember the one, there's another one that's 8 stanzas and then 4. Oh shoot, can't remember. So I have poems like that, except for villanelle. I just can't handle villanelle. But I fell in love with sestinas, and I was telling the gal over here, telling Sasha that sometimes I found that the poem just had to have a form. It just had to. I took one that was almost like an essay and turned it into a sestina, and it just fit into a sestina. So I absolutely love form. I was showing her one poem that it took 4 years, and it was called Blank Verse. I saw someone, I don't know, maybe on Facebook or somewhere that said, I'm working on a blank verse poem, and I thought, what the heck is that, a blank verse? Well, it doesn't have any end rhymes or anything, but it's iambic pentameter, and it has 5 beats to every line. And I have, I think, about 20 stanzas. I had emailed friends, this is email, this is like before any other form of social media, and said, tell me all of your thrifty stories that you had growing up that you were thrifty about. And one of them said that her grandma had a box that was labeled "String Too Short to Use." So that's the title of the poem. Isn't that fun? Uh-huh. Yeah, so the whole poem is like that, with people's stories of what they did when they were thrifty from Taqwšeblu, I say, even from a long time ago. So that I've never tried to do a blank verse. There's something else, I'm trying to think of the name of it, high band?
Yeah.
High band. Yeah,
I know that one.
Okay, so I haven't tried that yet.
That's why I'm here, folks.
I haven't tried it yet, but I'm going to. I'm going to start writing high band. It's calling to me, so remember that. So it's a little bit different, but I think I can do that.
Yeah, I think you can too. So then there's one, is it acrostic, Emily? Is that where it's the letter? This young girl, again, a 4th grader in Ronan on the reservation. Acrostic poems are when you use, like, you have a word and then you write lines based on the letters from that word. So in this case, the word was cat. So imagine cat written, vertically down the screen, and her poem for C was crying, A was at, and T was the party. Crying at the party was her poem. And think about how, like, just now even the room just was like, oh. We automatically assume that's bad, right? What if it's the opposite? What if she's crying because she got the electric football game, like when I was a kid? When you turn it on, you had little plastic dudes, and you turn it on, it's like, and they would move before video games. I probably cried when I got that gift. But that is what poetry does, even from the mind of a 10-year-old, 11-year-old girl. The different meanings that crying at the party can have in every single one of us. And I think that is what these types of things, you and I got to stand off stage last night, and kind of watch just the reactions of people as each one of you read these wonderful poems, and of course joy and all of that, and just the ripples of emotion. And looking at the person receiving that, you don't necessarily know where that emotion is coming from or how it is. You just see it. And that's beautiful. And you guys were I was so happy last night. What a great night of poetry.
I've never cried that consistently in public, in a good way. Crying at the party, right?
Yeah.
Although
Yes.
I want that on a shirt. That person is going to be a poet for sure.
Yes, for sure.
But yeah, I was just sitting there like bawling in the best way. Like So thank you for last night.
I would like to turn it over to questions from you now that we've got about 25 minutes till this session ends. Does anybody have a question? Nobody has a. Thank you.
So your poems last night, both of you, they evoke such emotion. Have there been things that evoke so much emotion that you've never been able to get it on a page? I mean, that you've tried and that it just can't happen.
I think Joy and I both agree that we have things that will never see daylight. We both have writings that will never see daylight. And in the back of my book, I have an essay about my father's journey to Chimawa. I had interviewed him before he passed away, and I wrote that essay, it took 2 years because I'd be typing and I'd just be bawling, just be crying, and but that did get published. But yeah, that was a tough one. I couldn't stop crying while I was writing it. So, yeah.
I feel like I have a nickname. My students call me Harsh Toke LaPointe, which is hilarious to me because I'm always writing about bummers. But so in that way, I'm like, no, I think I really tackle all of it. But even in just really examining that question honestly right now, there is like one thing that I probably will never write about. Like most things are fair game in my heart to like put on the page and share, but there is one thing that I'll never write about. Just one.
Yeah, right. Yeah. That's
Tricky.
no one's ever asked that question in any of the things I've done before, so that's a good one. I appreciate that. Anyone else?
Hi, this is such a wonderful event. Love it. I guess one of the things that I really struggle with, I'm a journalist, and so that's what I do for a living. But I consider myself a poet and a writer first. And part of my poetry is based very heavily on my life and the people in my life, my family, the person that I'm dating. And I have a really hard time, I guess, with my feeling comfortable sharing that with the world. And so I'm so curious about how you deal with like sharing these details about your life that aren't just your life, but also include other people, and how you do that in a way that's respectful to the people in your family and the people who are around you, but also honor your voice and your story.
I feel like I have two different answers. I'm so Gemini coded today. But it's valid, I think. Like for the prose, like my essays and the memoir, I absolutely had to, I brought it to my family for permission. Like I felt like compelled to do that. I was like, because you're right, like these are not just my stories. So I remember it was very scary passing it over to my parents and being like, but that to me when writing prose is super like crucial. But with poetry, I don't know if I would feel the same way. I don't think I've done that. I've never asked permission to write a poem. Well, I'm just dealing with that right now as it came out of my mouth. But as a journalist, right, you probably, like the difference between prose and poetry, right? Like, I don't know. So that was not helpful, but it was an honest answer.
Yeah, I belong to a writing group, and three of the ladies that are writing memoirs, and that's the question that's come up. I always thought if I wrote, say, about someone, I'd wait till they died, then I would write about it. But otherwise, then we also say, don't worry about your audience while you're writing, just write. So that's why a lot of my books are so traumatic about my personal life and family and so on. I didn't worry so much about the audience because it was so healing for me. Yeah, but it's a tough question. A minefield.
I do think, like with poetry, you can be a little bit, it's so personal and you can sort of veil things. I'm still trying to work that. I'm like, I'll find you later. Like, I'll have better ideas, not on the spot. But yeah.
But do write. Do get it out there, get it on the paper, and then you can decide later to be published. But do keep writing.
Do you think that's because it's actually true and so many people say, well, I don't read poetry? We can just say whatever we want because no one's going to read it anyway. Is that the idea?
That's so dark, but yeah. Like last night, I kept getting excited when people were buying the books of poetry. I was like, oh, you're actually buying rose quartz. Like, nobody ever buys the poetry, so you're right.
Uh-huh. Any other questions? Yes. I appreciate that.
I'm reading your book. It's real good.
Thank you.
Hinikaragi, Hochangade, Ma'e Mani. Sasha, after this, I'm going to lobby you to become my new bestie because I'm reading your book, and it's so good. I've read the first part where you talk all in Salish like 5 times, so it's even hard to get past that. Denise, I'm really glad that you brought up like, how you write for yourself, and I've been reading a lot of poetry lately, since November, and even more since January 20th, to bring more light and love into my own world as I grapple with everything that's happening. And, I've read Pablo Neruda, and, I'm into birding, so I read a lot about birds. And sometimes I read them and it just passes through me and I have no connection to it. And you said, you write for yourself, but I am wondering at some point, you have such an incredible platform to educate the broader public on indigeneity and our worldview. And I am wondering, like, if you have to write for yourself, but at what point do you say, how can I make this a little bit more relatable to a non-Indigenous community?
I don't write that deep. I know. Because I have a non-native writing group. So everything that I write goes through them, and they help me understand through their eyes what is more palatable to them, or what they can understand, or helps me write better so that the non-native audience will understand my work, which I do want. I want everyone in here to be able to read my books and not be so opaque that it's only Native people that would understand it. It's the same thing with the middle grade novel I'm writing right now. I'm running it through them. And I also belong to a Native writing group, like Angelina Bamoli is in the group, and so on. A lot of children book writers, and they also help me more to see a Native perspective. So yeah.
I'm like going back to my answer earlier, if I do consider audience, it's like still true to, like, I consider like 14-year-old Sasha on the res. I consider Native youth who need this book, and that's who I'm writing for. And thank goodness I have editors, maybe, because I feel like they might wrangle me a little bit because I do think, I agree with what you're saying. It's important that our work and our words reach a broader audience. So hopefully my editors do a good job of being like, calm down, you can't say that. I don't know. Yeah, with that. Yeah.
I had a similar question. I was leading a workshop last month, and a woman asked, well, as we were talking about kind of what the question you asked, and she asked, well, what if we just want to write about beauty? And I thought, that's fine too. We need beauty in the world, and for me, poetry has largely been just my exploration of how much I love the world, right? And so it's very much a focus on beauty, but then sometimes I do get pissed and I want to write things that are a little bit more, I think the role as artists is to speak truth to power, and how do you juggle those two? But, speaking truth to power is pretty beautiful too. So then that becomes the challenge of how do we make that kind of work beautiful? Some people do and do a great job of us, and some of it, and some of us aren't so good. But I struggle with that all the time. It's just that, am I serving my people by saying that I love the Eurasian collared doves because it sounds like they're chanting their way into heaven, with their constant cooing, like monks? And, I don't know. I think it's whatever is happening in you, and that's to me what poetry is. It's not what ends up on the page. It's what's going on. It's the paying attention. It's the churn in your spirit all the time, and how that then comes out in whatever it comes out as. I don't know. That's a hard question. We're done. Emma. Rocking the original Welch Fest t-shirt.
Yes. I have this question as I'm sort of trying to cultivate an eternal beginner mind, I think, about something, which is the process of revision. So I think it's become almost, you can nod at that. Yeah, it's my signature thing to keep asking that revision. But since you're both poets and you're both operating in this register that's at once sort of a reflection of your traditional culture, and also, as we were just talking about, being part of whatever, all of the things that are going on in the world right now. I just wanted to kind of think about, well, what does that look like for you? Is there a point when you think, oh, I didn't get this quite right? Like, maybe I could just take my own stab at it and say one of the best things anybody said to me was years before I became a quote-unquote serious writer, when I was a young writer. Someone said, that it was about, trying to find the beating heart within the piece. And I just wondered if you guys could both speak to what that's like for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I heard the word revision. Revise, revise, revise. Yes, some of my poems don't even look like anything how they started out. Yeah, so a lot of revision. The Dragonfly Dance, the title poem in my first book, Dragonfly Dance, I just about given up on it. And in fact, and that's one of the workshops that Louise and Hyde was in. And Louise said, just think of another title for your poem. And Hyde said, no, stick with it. So it took years to revise that poem. And then again, one thing that Larry Y. Whitty helped me with, I said, well, how do you know when the poem is done? Because I was a new poet. And he said, you don't, you abandon it. You just abandon it. So that's one poem that's in my book, Dragonfly Dance. I just had to abandon it. And I'm pretty happy with it. But man, that went through tons of revision. So I've had people say, can you read my poems? I had one young man say, can you read my poems? And he said, I'm not going to change a word. And I said, I just handed them back to him. Said, no, if you're not going to revise, then I'm not going to help you or read it. So that's the first thing when in writing, doing a poetry workshop that I tell young people I work with is that you just know that you are going to revise, revise, revise.
I absolutely agree. And also, when you were asking that question, I got this visceral response. I started getting sweaty. I was like, oh God, because I'm currently in a revision process, and it's scary. It's the hardest part. You can come to the page and just be like, bah, 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 yeah, and it feels really good, right? I feel like as writers, we all experience that. And then when you come back and have to fix it, that's when I'm just like, no, ripping my hair out and having a tantrum. But revision is really hard for me, and it's also such a crucial part of the process. And I think that for me, I need space. Right now, I'm super obsessed with orcas. I've been doing lots of orca research. I have been writing lots of orca poems. And I have this huge stack, and also allowing it to shift and change, because before it became orca poems, it was about falling in love with a surfer and my love of the ocean. And then I was like, I'm gonna write a happy book. This is gonna be cute. And then I was like, oh, but if we consider the ocean, if we consider the state of the world, I'm like, this is not a happy book. And then it pivoted into orca territory, which has been beautiful and intense, and I have this big stack of them, and I had to walk away, abandon it, but I'm coming back, right? I do think that there's something really wise in once you have all the stuff there that you bang, 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 bang on the page, leave it, think about it, come back to it. And then I'm seeing all these things I have a Free Willy reference? Okay. I need to but I wouldn't have noticed that while writing it at first, right? I was like, this is fire. And then I take some time, and I come back, and I was like, no. So who knows? Maybe Free Willy will stay. But for me, revision is all about having space from it. And whether you abandon it, which could work, but abandon it and come back with a fresh brain. That was a weird thing to say, fresh brain. But you know what I mean. So that's what helps me, space.
I love revision. It's my favorite part of it. Just the fine tuning, but you'll see particularly in poetry, if you read the acknowledgments, either at the front or the back of the book, you'll often see the list of poems that were published elsewhere before. And almost every single one will say the following poems appeared in these other places, sometimes in a significantly different version or something like that. And not just poetry, but, again, with the background, we had one writer who came to Fact and Fiction to do a reading and forgot his copy of his book. So he borrowed one, and then for his reading, he was editing what he was, so he crossed out a bunch of stuff and rewrote it in the finished published book. So you're right, you ultimately just kind of abandon it. And it lives in that time, what it was when it was published or whatever, but it can change, just like we change as people. Okay, we got time. You got another comment?
Well, full disclosure, a couple of the poems I read last night actually changed some of the words in the poems too. So if you listen to me and then we're reading along in my book, it's oh, she changed. So yeah, we're just forever revising.
Yeah.
I do that every time.
Yeah.
Little things. So I'm glad I'm not the only one.
Yeah. Probably one more. One. Well, maybe two more, depending on how verbose you are.
Yeah, I'll try not. Hi, and thank you both, Sasha and Denise, for being here. We're just, as a community here in Missoula, so thrilled that you're here and speaking to, really inspiring not only our youth, but all of us. And so thank you for your words last night. It was very, very moving. And that was my question. So my youngest child and I walked away, and we were really inspired by all the words that you shared last night. And we wanted to think about ways to, start our own process of writing. And I write more science type of things. One of the things I picked up from students as well as my own kids is, they grew up here in Missoula, and they're usually the only Native child in the whole class. And they face a lot of racism here in Missoula and elsewhere. But one of the things that's kind of really a unique, in a way, piece of this generation is there's a deep fear of cringe and like risking looking foolish or feeling foolish. And there's almost this performative anxiety from all of the social media that they're exposed to. And so a lot of what I'm hearing is like kids not wanting to try because they're afraid of failing so badly. And here in Montana, we have kids who are really struggling with suicidal ideation and all these different things. And poetry and arts could be such an important and therapeutic piece of that puzzle to solve. And I wonder if there's ways that you could kind of think of to help kids kind of combat that fear of cringe and like be able to kind of really assert who they are as Native people, even when their environment doesn't reflect any of that in a positive way.
That's such an important question, and thank you for this question. I've been on pretty big anti-duty for the past couple months, and so I know what you're talking about, like seeing my little nieces and nephew like not want to try things. You're right, there is like, it just kind of clicked when you were saying it. I was like, oh, that is what it is, like this fear of like, oh, I don't want to look dumb or cringe. Even my partner and I took them to surf camp up in Quinault, and at first they did the cool guy thing just on their phones, and we're like, dude, wetsuits, waves, and they're just like, this is boring, Auntie. And it's like, okay. But then once they came out of their shell, and like, I kept them there for 2.5 days camping in the middle of nowhere, so they had to. So maybe do that, try that. But then there was so much joy once they stopped caring, once their phones ran out of battery and they were in a tent. But it was really beautiful to see that shift in them, and them actually enjoying and engaging in nature was truly beautiful. And I think, to speak to the writing aspect of it, finding a book, maybe starting with a book that they could kind of see them, like having them read as a group. Some poets that come to mind, Tay Tibble, she's a Maori poet, and like all of my students love her work, even my nieces and nephew love her work. And showing them that like poetry that they could maybe like see themselves in or relate to or would be fun for them, because she's talking about heavy, beautiful, like generational like lineage Maori identity, but she's also talking about wearing aviators at the club. And like, I feel like it would be a good, having them read as a group and maybe get inspired and be like, oh, I can do that. That's my advice. Sorry, I rambled.
I'm kind of removed from that generation. My grandkids are like 30 years old. So what I want to do, though, in January, there's an American Poets Fellowship. That's a $50,000 fellowship that a lot of poet laureates apply for. I'm hoping to apply for that and get it. And if I do, I want to go to all 4 reservations in North Dakota and work with Native youth to write poetry. Because like I was saying, my poems help save my sanity, literally, and save my life. And so there's one poem that even Joy Harjo, it came out recently in I think the New Yorker, and it's I Am From. Did you see her poem, I Am From, or I Am? It's a very simple beginning, and I always have my students write that, because then they start talking about who they are as Native people and where they're from. And I happen to have had a draft of I Am From in my drawer that I had put away, and Joy, I said, oh no, Joy wrote it. I can't write one because Joy wrote one now, but I do have one that will hopefully be published in my next book. It's just a very simple starter, I am from or I am. So I'm hoping to encourage these Native youth in Fort Yates and Fort Taunton and Fort Berthold and Turtle Mountain to write. And I do even a grief poetry writing workshop. You know, grief can kill you. So, but again, it's saved my sanity to be able to write about what was happening in my world. So that's what I hope to do with Native youth, is to help them just see who they are and where they're from and the beauty of where they're from.
Also, Chris brought up acrostic poetry. I do that with my students. The ones who are like a little reluctant, they're like, I don't like poetry. And I'm like, cool, do this. And they love it. Also, collage poetry. They have a lot of fun with that because they get to like cut and paste and be artistic while also considering words. So
Yeah, and I mostly worked in Belcourt with the middle school and high school, but so many of the elementary teachers, they do the end rhyme, you know, ta-da, end rhyme, ta-da, and when you do that, sometimes you have to force the words and it doesn't sound natural, so I forbid end rhyme poetry when I work with young people. So if any of you are teachers of poetry with young kids, please just don't just do the end rhyme because they have to force it doesn't sound natural. So anyway, so yeah.
One thing we have in Montana too is we have a constitutional mandate to teach Indian Ed for all. And, you know, that's not just about treaties and removal and trauma. It's modern things, too. So, like, you could use Indian Ed for All money to bring someone in like Sasha to talk about the work that she does and how that then inspires in the way that goes back to the question about, you know, being a role model, you know, because of the other work you do. So, in Montana, it doesn't just happen. You know, as citizens here, we have to make sure it happens. And kind of to tie that back to, you know, Anna said last night in her remarks before the event, is that this festival is like the ultimate expression of Indian Ed for All because we are all in here learning about this stuff together. So, you know, in Montana, we're already amazingly, as much of a dumpster fire as our state government is, we're ahead of the curve on a lot of this stuff. Nobody else has a constitutional mandate at the state level to do that. And it's really important that we help teachers figure out how to make that work because nobody tells them. You know, they're told to do it and then, okay, now you go figure it out. So it's up to us to say, okay, you know, what is it that you're teaching in your class and how does that relate to Indigenous practices or an Indigenous person doing something in that field. So I think all of that, you folks, you gals writing the work that you're writing and just showing up and that I think is a step in the direction that you're talking about. But it's a long game, like so much of this stuff. You know, we're not going to solve it in 2 years or 5 years or whatever, but if we just keep going, keep showing up, we will.
I'm going to shamelessly plug that I low-key love it here and would come back in a heartbeat, just for anybody. Just know I'm only an hour and a half away on a plane.
Yeah, let's leave it at that. We're done. And you guys can go over and sign some books if you want. It's lunch break now, and we're going to resume, I think, at 2:15 or 2 o'clock. The schedule's posted out there. So thank you. What a great crowd of people to come and listen to people talk about poetry.